Quick note before we actually get into today's episode. My guest today is Mr. Matt Zemon, who has a master's degree in psychology and neuroscience. I just want to pre-frame the fact we're talking to a guy that's very well educated. And we're actually going to have an open conversation about exploring psychedelic-assisted therapy. Now, again, this is just meant to be an explorative conversation. Please don't take anything we're saying here as gospel. Do your own research into it. And as Matt says at the end, if you want to find any more information, either purchase his book, do some more research yourself, or reach out to him and he'll happily guide you in the right direction. This is a fantastic conversation. I definitely think it's one where you want to take some notes potentially. Pause it, think about what you're saying, because we do go down some rabbit holes, but it's very, very scientifically backed, and it's a fantastic conversation that I know you'll enjoy. Early 50s, 60s, 70s, this stuff was really getting traction for actually helping people with mental health conditions. Can we actually talk about that? Because that's the most important thing, I think, to realize that this stuff isn't new. There was a very bad narrative pushed with it that people bought into. But before that, it was actually this amazing wonder thing for mental health. So can we just deep dive into the history of it all, really?
Absolutely. I mean, this is our country's fault. Our bad. The Nixon administration in 1970 passed the Controlled Substances Act. And then we pushed that legislation, which made all of these substances illegal across the world.
Welcome to the Prime Life Project podcast, a place to help you unlock your full potential, both mentally and physically, to become the best version of you. Welcome back to an episode of the Prime Life Project podcast, a place to help you both mentally and physically become the best version of you. Today, I've got a fantastic guest who I've been doing a lot of research on. And the reason why I've done a lot of research on him is because I know the value he's going to bring. And I just wanted to make sure that I did this podcast justice. Now, it's not very often I get nervous doing the podcast, but what we're going to be talking about, the subject and the contents of it, that you've got to do it justice. And so I had to make sure I did my due diligence. And I think I've done a good job. But my guest today is Mr. Matt Zemon. Matt, how are we?
Daniel, I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing very, very well. Thank you very much. Like I said, this is a topic that I've found very, very fascinating. So it's not a topic that I personally have ever been involved in or done anything with. My videographer, Mikey, again, for long-term listeners of the podcast, will know that he has. But psychedelics, I find them fascinating. As I said to you off air, I've been to hear a talk about it. But for me, it's not just how fascinating they are. What I want to talk about today is how they're used in therapeutics and this assisted therapy, which I think my audience will have no idea about because it's something that's kind of been pushed under the rug a little bit, but now it's made another reemergence. So before we get into all that, can you take my audience back to what got you into this whole subject of psychedelics and your personal journey with psychedelics?
Yeah, I'm happy to back up in time. So almost 4 years ago, I was a non-drug user, not really a big drinker. And some really good friends said, "Hey, we've hired a guide to do this guided magic mushroom or psilocybin journey. Do you want to come with us?" I was like, no, I do not. But thank you for the invitation. They said, whoa, come on. You love learning. You're reading all the time. This is a great opportunity to learn about yourself. And you love travel. And this is an amazing journey to take within yourself. And they were pretty persuasive. So I ended up doing it. And that 6 hours completely changed the way I look at and interact with this world. I just couldn't believe how beautiful it was. I couldn't believe how loved I felt. I couldn't believe just what I experienced. And I knew immediately that, okay, I need to know more about this. I need to learn as much as possible. And then I believe there's something here that other people can benefit from.
Because you said you had it was like a life-changing experience. Can you actually paint a picture for what you actually experienced in this first experience with it? Because it is very out there and people find it hard to believe. And you'll see things on documentaries, which is why I want to have this conversation with you, because a documentary is all well and good, but we actually get to unpick this here. So what was that experience like for you? Because I know that it was very, very deep and profound.
It really was. I mean, for me, the first thing that happened was my mom died when she was 49. I was 22. And that was the saddest I've ever been in my life. In this experience, so now fast forward, I don't know, 25 years, I reconnected with her. And I know what that sounds like. But she was there and I could feel her and I could understand that I'm carrying her forward and I could see that my kids are carrying us forward. And in that moment, I realized that I felt so loved and so safe, which then, like a moment later, I was like, wow, wait a minute. I don't feel love and safe in my normal life.
Mm.
And then it was, well, wait, one more minute. I can't remember when I felt this loved and safe. And it made me say, how do I get more of this in my life when I'm not taking these types of medicines? How can I have more love and safety in my existence? And that was like a one, two, three, boom, boom, boom. Wow, that's a lot right there. And if the experience stopped then, I would have been satisfied. It continued. This realization that I'm afraid of dying. My mom died at when she was I'm again 49. My dad was about 62 when he passed. And I think I was living my life afraid of dying and making choices, assuming that I was going to die young,
Mm.
and being very afraid of dying. And all of that went away in this very first experience. Um, yeah, I mean, it was just so beautiful.
Mm. I've heard you say that you felt a real sense of connection with everything. And again, long-term listeners of the show will know that I'm very big on energy and everything being energy and stuff like that. Did you get that real sense of like connection with energy and everything that was around you? And
I
also, were you scared when you went to take it?
Yeah, I was definitely nervous. I mean, I'm definitely a controlled person. I build businesses, I tech enable systems. I'm very structured. And the idea that I'm going to give myself over to this medicine for 6 hours and have no control, there's no driving. Yeah, I was definitely nervous about that. That's not something I was experienced with doing. The connection piece was also profound for me. The with psilocybin, I've learned it's a very grounding medicine, or magic mushrooms for those listening. It makes you feel connected to the earth in a way that is just different than your everyday experience. And then
Mm.
it also, for me, when I was looking at nature during that experience, I could see the trees and the leaves and the flowers in a way that I had not seen them before. I couldn't remember seeing them before. But then I also felt connected, deeply connected to the people who were there with me, and then deeply connected to kind of everybody, the whole world.
Mm.
And that idea that people say, "Oh, we're all brothers and sisters." It's like, yeah, it's nice. This like okay, this was the first time I really understood that we are all brothers and sisters.
You felt it almost.
I felt it, and I feel it to this day. That does not go away, or that has not gone away for me. That is and it's a radical shift. It's a shift for someone like me who is not spiritual, who's not who didn't believe in a god or in a higher power, and did not think there was anything after this existence, and all of that shifted on this day. So I
Mm.
mean, so many things happened in 6 hours. It's hard to fathom that much could happen with one molecule in 6 hours.
And that's why I want to really deep dive into this, because the more you sort of go into it, it kind of explains how it all sort of happens and intertwines. But the key thing I like about you, Matt, is the fact that you aren't quote unquote your typical drug taker. As we said, you're a businessman, like that's not your background, and you were almost forced is the wrong word, but you weren't just like, yeah, let's go take this stuff. And the fact of you went in there with no expectations, and that's what came out of it. I think that's the fascinating thing with this. So before we dive any deeper, can we just define what a psychedelic actually is for the audience? Because again, I've never taken a psychedelic. Obviously, I've done some research. I know what they are, but for my audience listening to this that have no idea what a psychedelic actually is, can we get a definition of a psychedelic before we deep dive into this?
Yeah, I mean, so when we talk about psychedelics, we talk about mind altering or mind expanding medicines. So for the audience who's not familiar, think about the ones you've heard of would be obviously magic mushrooms and LSD or acid probably. But there are hundreds of psychedelic medicines out there. Yes, there are hundreds of mushrooms and there are hundreds of psychedelics. So ones that you might not have heard of are things like ayahuasca, which is pretty much found in Central America, South America, Hawaii. There's one called ibogaine, which is from iboga, which is an African root. That's pretty common. MDMA is being considered a psychedelic. It is not a classic psychedelic, but it's considered one, and we're seeing tremendous research. Here in the States, we expect MDMA to be legal federally within the next 2 years. They
Mm.
just finished the phase 3 clinical trials. The FDA gave it a breakthrough therapy designation. It's on the path to being legal. Ketamine is a legal psychedelic. This is most people know it as an anesthesia, but when taken in lower doses, it has many psychedelic properties, and it can go on. There's MDA, which is a precursor to MDMA. There's just so many different psychedelics, and they have different purposes. There are some psychedelics that are really good at opening your heart, making you feel just incredibly loved, making you feel like you have loving energy that you can send into the world and that you can receive it. There's other psychedelics that are more grounding. There's others that are more visual. There's others that are more galactic, for lack of a better word. Um, Ibogaine. If you had a someone a loved one who was struggling with an opioid challenge or heroin, like Ibogaine is kind of the it is a solution. It's a beautiful, beautiful medicine for trying to get people off of those
Mm.
substances.
I find it very interesting that you're using the word medicine here, because I just want to quickly go back into the history of psychedelics before we sort of dive into how it actually affects the brain, because I find this whole thing fascinating. Because you're using the word medicine, 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 whereas most people listening to this will hear the word psychedelic. They'll hear you saying things like LSD, ecstasy, magic mushrooms, and they will have a very, very negative connotation. I even spoke to my parents about doing this episode, and you can see the look on their face straight away. So we're looking at this, and again, when you actually do research into this, you realize that this stuff's been suppressed, and there was a narrative around it that it is negative, that you're basically going to take this stuff and jump off buildings, that you're going to have these visions that dogs are attacking you. These ones I can remember when I was at school and a
Of
police officer
course.
came in and said this stuff to me. But actually, when you do the research into this, and I mentioned the workshop went to a couple of months ago, and again, you've mentioned it as well. When you actually look into the early, like 50s, 60s, 70s, this stuff was really getting traction for actually helping people with mental health conditions. Can we actually talk about that? Because that's the most important thing, I think, to realize that this stuff isn't new. There was a very bad narrative pushed with it that people bought into. But before that, it was actually this amazing wonder thing for mental health. So can we just deep dive into the history of it all, really?
Absolutely. I mean, this is our country's fault. Our bad. The Nixon administration in 1970 passed the Controlled Substances Act, and then we pushed um, that legislation, which made all of these substances illegal across the world. The narrative was, oh, this is really bad for people. There's no medicinal use. It's going to get people addicted. This is what society needs. The reality is, the Nixon administration was trying to infiltrate the hippies, or the anti-war people, as well as the black communities and the civil rights activities that were happening. And later they said, yeah, this wasn't about science. Um, so all of us born 1971 or later have only known propaganda. We've only known prohibition. So we've all been taught the same things, and it's really hard when we hear about our visceral reaction. We have 50 years of programming is, oh, these are bad, bad, danger, warning, and all of our fight and flight reflexes kick in when we start hearing about these medicines. Part of why LSD is not researched as much as these other medicines, even though it's super powerful, is it's much, that of all of them is the hardest one to politically push forward, because of how widespread the use was in the late 60s, and the in kind of society's views of that particular medicine. But I'm sticking with that for just a moment. There were 1,000 papers, or more than 1,000 papers, on the efficacy of LSD for alcoholism alone before 1970.
Mm.
Um, the tremendous results on getting people off of this very dangerous, very harmful substance, alcohol, and using LSD prior. So yes, the 50s, 60s, 70s, lots and lots of research, lots of promise. MDMA actually continued on through into the 80s with work with couples and with trauma, and then that was rescheduled.
Mm.
So it's interesting that one's coming back. But yeah, for your listeners, this is not only new. I mean, it's been used for thousands of years in cultures all over the world, every continent. Um, but research wise, just lots and lots of research prior to the prohibition starting, and then everything kicked back in kind of in the 90s, and now we're seeing what 300 plus academic institutions studying psychedelics on psychedelic centers. It's incredible right now, the amount of
Mm.
research happening.
I'm going to get people to. I'm going to link your book at the end, and we're going to talk about that. But again, you've also referenced something that I've watched, which is a Michael Pollan documentary. It's now currently on Netflix called "How to Change Your Mind," where he goes into a lot of detail about this as well. So if people aren't believing what Matt's talking about, like you basically can see all the scientists, the interviews, the actual original person that found LSD and stuff like that. It's absolutely fascinating. I think when the prohibition kicked in, I think it was like 40,000 subjects that had taken LSD. So we're not talking about a few subjects. There was thousands of people that actually been helped with LSD before it got banned. And I just find it absolutely fascinating that that was actually allowed to happen. It's just bizarre to me that you've got something that's helping people and they've just wiped it clean and basically therapy had to stop straight away. It's just bizarre to me.
It's shocking. It's shocking that science was beat up so badly by politics with this.
Mm.
And I mean, all of us now have lived in a world where the only option for depression has been these antidepressants, which was invented over 50 years ago. There really hasn't been a major shift in mental health care in 50 years. And for 40% of the population, plus or minus a little bit, they don't work. And when people do take them, they come with a really high price tag in terms of side effects. So they don't tell you that 70 some percent of people on many of these antidepressants have sexual dysfunction. It's a big price tag.
Mm.
Um, Gastrointestinal issues. I mean, how many people do we know that are complaining about stomach issues? It's significant. And then you get hooked on these medicines. You have to take them every day. You're feeding the machine, and they're really hard to get off of.
Mm.
The other thing with antidepressants, in addition to the length of time you have to take them, is it's 6 to 14 weeks to even figure out if this particular antidepressant works for you. And then you might have to try another and then another. With psychedelic medicine, you're not taking it every day. The side effects are much, much, much less. And you're going to know in hours whether this has an impact on you or not. And
What the study's saying about this? Because I know you're very like science based, so this isn't just all theory you're talking about here. So for my audience, can we actually talk about like what are the actual research papers saying about the difference between an antidepressant and psychedelics for depression?
yeah, I mean, it just the research is showing a bunch of things. So you talk about kind of what makes it effective. So are we seeing a reduction in depression or anxiety symptoms? Um, and the answer is yes, period. Ketamine is again, ketamine is legal. So there's a bunch of studies coming out right now. There's one with 1,200 participants just came out using oral ketamine. So this is the easiest type of ketamine of the scale of ketamine. Let me back up for a moment. You can go into a ketamine clinic and have an IV put into your arm and take ketamine that way. You can go into a clinic and have an intramuscular shot. You can go in and have a nasal spray. And in many cases, you can order a telehealth ketamine where a prescriber does the intake, meets you virtually, and then sends you medicine. And then you work with a guide or a therapist to take it. 1,200 people, oral ketamine, so comfort of their own homes. 89% showed improvements in depression and anxiety. 63% with 50% or more. Those are big numbers. And then under 5% side effects. And of those side effects, most resolve when the ketamine wears off. So yeah, you're going to feel disassociated with your body. That's a side effect, and that's a benefit.
Yeah.
The so that's just one example of what research is saying with one particular medicine. But you could take psilocybin. You could look at people with terminal cancer or terminal illness, and here we are in one dose. They can feel release from depression. The weight of the anxiety comes off. They feel more connected with their family. They feel less afraid to die. They feel more connected spiritually. This is not woo-woo new age discussions. This is Johns Hopkins and Imperial College research saying, oh my gosh, look at this. People are saying this is one of the top 5 experiences of their life, top 10, even if it's challenging, it's in the top 5 or 10 experiences of their life, more important or as important as getting married, having children.
Mhm.
There is a lot here for people who are interested in these medicines therapeutically.
'Cause I think we've gone to a stage now where when it comes to medicines and helping people with mental health, it's a lot less about actually helping the individual than it is actually feeding the pharmaceutical companies. Now, the reason why I say that is mental health has not got better. it's got worse. So the more these companies are coming in and the more people are on antidepressants, the situation is getting worse. So I'm not sure if you'd agree with me on this. So I'll make the statement rather than you putting yourself in any situation. But it seems to me that pharmaceutical companies aren't going to benefit from these types of therapies because, as you've sort of mentioned, after one sitting, the impact is so profound that you don't have to take it every day. So is that something that you think there's a bit of resistance? I've also heard, correct me if I'm wrong, that there's a very big pharmaceutical company that's trying to patent psilocybin. Like, is that what's going on here? A big pharma company is trying to, are they getting involved in this to make this mainstream? Because it does seem so profound, but it's a bit like, is it actually going to be a thing, or is this going to have to stay underground in only a few sort of centers?
So it gets complicated. So let's try to unpack this a little bit. So the first thing you asked is are the incentives the same for psychedelic medicine as they are for traditional antidepressants? And the answer is no. I mean, nobody takes a psychedelic every day. Even if you're microdosing, you're taking it for a few weeks at a time and then taking a break, and it's a very small amount. So the financial incentives for pharmaceutical companies, just in terms of volume, is less. On top of that, there's a lot of psychedelics that are available in nature. So there are a number of organizations that there's one called decriminalization or decrim nature, and their philosophy is if it's we shouldn't make something illegal that's available to all of us. Um, from that same kind of branch of thought is well, then you shouldn't be able to patent or uh, yeah, but you shouldn't be able to commercialize that when it should be free for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
There's a medicalization model that says, well, wait a minute, okay, that I get that, and we need to provide consistency to our patients because they're looking at us humans as patients in that setting, and for science purposes, it needs to be consistent. So we do need pharmaceutical companies to isolate parts of this and create consistent medicine from this so that when someone takes 5 grams of the equivalent 5 grams of dried psilocybin, it's the same 5 grams as the same 5 grams.
Mm-hmm.
So there are companies that are absolutely trying to patent it. There is some controversy around that with the people who don't believe that it should be allowed, and there's people who are celebrating that because it gets more people access. And I can see both sides of the argument. Colorado over here, one of our states, did a really interesting thing. They had a ballot initiative where they said, let's do two things here with this ballot. If the voters agree, we are going to create a state medical framework where adults 21 and over can go into mental health or psychedelic clinics and get psychedelic medicine. And we are going to decriminalize 5 different psychedelics. And that way it kind of met both groups' needs. Not perfectly, there's still controversy, but the voters did vote, yes, that's what we want. And in our country, that's going to take shape here over the next 2 years, but it's kind of a lovely compromise for that. So there, and then I guess you're also asking about big business in the same question. So yes, you have pharmaceutical companies trying to patent and trying to standardize the experience. But then you also have companies that are setting up training programs. How are we going to train as many guides as we need to take people into non-ordinary states of consciousness? And you have other companies setting up clinics and creating environments that are safe containers for people to take the medicine. And you have other companies like my company Happy setting up telehealth companies to help people get access. And you have other companies setting up niches within this. I'm going to set up psychedelics for addiction, or psychedelics for substance use, or psychedelics for weight disorders, or psychedelics for obsessive compulsive people, or there's a psychedelics for autism group now. So you have lots and lots of industries popping up. I mean, this is a multi-billion-dollar space already. And I'll tell you, as an entrepreneur, the mental health space has no shortage of opportunities for change.
Mm-hmm.
So this is really exciting. If you're just to say, oh wow, we have this technology and a whole bunch of problems, how do we merge that? There's a lot here for that as well.
Because I said it's just everything about it. I think the way you've explained that is perfectly. Because I was really worried that the pharmaceutical companies were trying to be sort of backhanded by patenting it. But actually, the way you've explained that makes perfect sense. You want it to be consistent. My question with that then is, if you're taking a magic mushroom in its natural form, you're not just going to get psilocybin. You're going to get a lot of other natural things within the mushroom. Does that play an effect on the experience that someone would have versus taking just pure synthetic psilocybin?
I can't, I don't have a great answer for that. That's really, that is a core philosophical question that's asked in this industry a
Mm,
lot, and asked in this space a lot. There are people who believe that nature is the way to go and that we don't understand, which we try to intellectualize everything, and you can't explain what nature can give. There's other people who say, you know what, an element's an element is an element. And the fact that we synthesize this, it still came out of nature. It just came out of nature via a lab versus the ground. And I think that's really an interesting position. I know from my personal experience, I've had tremendous uh, beautiful experiences with things like ketamine and LSD and MDMA. And I've had beautiful experiences with ayahuasca and psilocybin. So I don't know. I think it's fun to play with things like Terrence McKenna talked about, um, that we are so arrogant as a species that we think intelligent life has to look like us.
mm,
But why would intelligent life look like us? And he proposed that mushrooms potentially are from outer space, and that they are an intelligent life form, and they spread out across large portions of the United States or world actually, and
mm,
they have Buddhist principles and how they share and how they feed and how they communicate, and they're essentially indestructible. And they have this knowledge inside of them that when we consume it, they're sharing their information with us. And
mm,
I think that's a beautiful concept. Do I know that to be true? No, but I think it's beautiful. I think it's fun to play with.
mm. I love that. Let's then talk now about how these psychedelics actually work when it comes to the brain, because this is where I find it absolutely fascinating. I think I've got a quote from you here where it basically says, "To taking psychedelics lifts you out of the ways you've been thinking and allows you to see other ways to think." How does that then actually work? Like, how does this work on like brain pathways and neurons and all that sort of stuff? Like, how do these compounds just completely change how your brain works?
Yeah, so they all work in a similar manner. There are differences. Don't get me wrong, but they're similar. So the first thing it's going to do is it turns down what we call the default mode network. So think about like the voice in your head that's constantly, this is good, this is bad, you're not doing a good job. It's that narrator, that constant voice. So it's going to turn that down. And that for a lot of people is like, wow, I didn't realize how much I was talking to myself and not giving myself love. Um, a lot of times it allows neurons to fire that haven't fired together in a long, long time. So as we get older, we all kind of get into this repetitive thought pattern with how we think, and we don't even know that. And so and you can't. I mean, extreme ends. We've seen people with OCD and with types of autism who we know they're stuck in these different loops. Um, there are people when we have substance use challenges, we can also say, okay, they're stuck in a behavioral loop. Well, for this, once you're with this medicine, it allows these neurons to fire that don't normally fire. And that is a reminder to the person of, wow, I didn't know I could think this way. I haven't, everything has been gray for so long. I forgot that everything could be blue or it can be sunny. And that's powerful. That reminder is powerful. Um, we then get into kind of the dissociative effects. So you've now separated maybe you from your body, and you have this idea for the first time that maybe we are bigger than this physical container that we lug around all day. Maybe there is more to life than just this in my little view of the world. We then get into potentially a spiritual connection of whatever that is for that person, whatever type of higher power, that okay, maybe there is an afterlife, maybe there is a something else out there. Um, and all of this is uh, refreshing. It is eye opening. And then I tend to say that psychedelics aren't a cure, they are a catalyst. And
Mm,
what I mean by that is during this journey, you can have all these things happen in your brain, and you can have this the weight of the world lifted from your shoulders and say, wow, okay, I now remember what it's like not to feel that much weight. Where psychedelics really become powerful is then when you start doing what we call integration work. So after this journey is over, how do you create a practice for your life, happy habits, whatever you want to call it, that you can try to remember what that felt like and try to keep more of that in your life. So that's kind of the work following the psychedelic journey.
That's what I've really found fascinating about watching this documentary and finding more about this sort of stuff is the therapy side of things. It's a case of you're not taking this thing to fix you, you're taking this thing along then with the normal sort of therapy route to basically help you dissect what's just sort of happened and like I said integrate. But I think that's for me, my personal opinion is when working with clients and stuff is when it comes to the modern approach to depression, for example, it's take this tablet, off you go. And then
Right,
they're
take
not
this tablet, let's numb the symptom,
and then what?
and that's it.
Oh, and now you're addicted to this. And if you want to come off it, it's going to really fuck you up for the next 3-4 months. So it's like, that's great. So I would say to people, like, I'm not antidepressants at all. I'm not antidepressants. Some people genuinely, I think, if they need to, they've got to take it. So I always say, but once you've again got that to stop you jumping off the cliff, metaphorically, right, what are you then going to do to make sure you're not dependent on these? And I think that's where the modern approach fails people. They're just like, take this tablet and off you go. Where it's like, okay, cool. So you stop this person from going down this negative spiral. Great. But how are you then going to get them to be themselves? Which, again, linking back to what you just said there, it seems to me like it basically allows people to reconnect with themselves and get out of their own way almost. Because as you said, that voice inside your head, everyone's got it, whether aware of it or not. And most people aren't aware of how negative and disempowering it actually is. So you're basically getting yourself out of your way and you've been like, look at all this amazing stuff that's there. You then come out of it, and then the therapist is like, right, what have you learned, and how are we going to make sure we can keep this going? Have I got that correct?
I think you said that beautifully. Psychedelic medicine is, for the most part, a self-healing or inner healing modality. So even if you work with a therapist, and that word's a challenging word for especially for a lot of men. I mean, women go to therapy at a higher percentage than men. Men tend to be resistant, or many men tend to be resistant. So I'm happy to use the word coach. I'm happy to use the guide. I'm happy to use the word integrator, whatever word makes you comfortable. But the idea is that person's not there to give you their opinion. Oh, think back to what is this, blah, blah, blah. And you should think about this. No, they're there to ask you questions. They're there to help you remember what you already know and to bring that out of you. And then one more thing I didn't bring on up on something that the psychedelic medicine does that I think is why we're seeing so many positive results with people who have suffered great trauma, whether PTSD, so sexual assault, veterans, first responders. It removes, again, for 6 hours, it can remove shame, blame, and guilt. And when you take that away, and I'm not saying intellectually away, you take it emotionally away, you don't feel it. So you're able to look at these things that have happened in a different perspective. And that can lead to profound healing. So one of the stories I told in my book, Daniel, is as an early teenager, I had some inappropriate sexual contact with a family member, 10 years older, and was mortified. I mean, I tucked that away deep in a drawer. Didn't talk about it with anybody. Just wasn't. It just and every now and again, whether it's a television show or talking to somebody, when somebody would make some kind of comment, my ears would start burning. I'd have a pit in my stomach. Yeah, I think mortified is the right word. Something I was deeply, deeply embarrassed about. But not something I was looking for help, not something that was an intention, just something that was inside of me. I was fine, is what I mean, I thought I was fine, fine, I'm good. And on one of these psychedelic journeys, I was right back there in that situation. And I knew I didn't want to be there. But one of the things they tell you with these medicines is when you get something that's challenging, if you flee from it or try to flee, it's going to be really hard. You need to lean into it. You need to say, what are you here to teach me? And I was able to look at this situation with a whole different perspective. Shame, blame, and guilt's gone. And I was able to look at this and say, okay, this person had substance use challenges. This person was feeling so unloved. This person was feeling rejected. This person was feeling not smart. This person, everywhere she looked, was was not pretty. Um, so I don't have to condone or forgive what happened. I certainly don't have to take responsibility that at 13 that this was my fault. But I could look at this person as a human and say, okay, as a human, I could understand the need for the desire for love, chose bad mechanisms to try to achieve it, but I could understand it. I could empathize and I could let it go. And immediately that I can now talk about this. I can now talk about it without blinking an eye. That shame's not there. And I can tell you, it just feels different to be alive with that gone.
Mm.
And we're seeing that. The statistic I often show is with people with MDMA and PTSD, treatment resistant PTSD. So people have tried other medicines, they've tried different talk therapies. 3 sessions with MDMA and 67% no longer qualify as having PTSD.
Mm.
So how are we not giving this to our veterans, our first responders, or victims of sexual assault? How are we letting them suffer? How are we letting them kill themselves, take their own lives, when there's a medicine that works with that high of a percentage rate, a success rate? It just seems cruel to me that that's not available.
Mm. When you had that realization for yourself and
Mm-hmm.
you came out from that experience, did you make a conscious choice to be like, I'm letting that go? Or did it just naturally just dissolve away? Like, was it like a conscious thing where you're like, oh, I now see it as this and I'm going to choose to let it go? Or was it just natural?
It's natural. A
Yeah.
lot of this stuff, yeah, it just goes away. The other thing that went away for me, and again, I have got a lot of stories at this point, but I haven't had a drink since my first psychedelic experience. Just all desire to drink went away. As I've now talked to more people who've had, I'm not alone in that. And that wasn't an intention. So I can only imagine if I went into this with the intention to reduce my alcohol use, reduce my smoking. Um, yeah, I see why this works. I see why. I mean, Johns Hopkins has an incredible study on smoking, taking lifelong smokers, nothing's worked, no patches, no gums, hypnosis, and psilocybin's getting them to stop. And a year later, measured a year later, measured 2 years later. It's really, really, nobody can say this is why this works. It works because of this, and that, but it works.
Do you think it could be down to the fact that people use these things to deal with life? What I mean, like smoking, normally to deal with stress or whatever it is, alcohol to like escapism. And then when they're put in a situation where they realize, as you sort of said, this connection and this oneness with life, they realize that they don't need that stuff anymore. It kind of just frees them up of all that stuff that they were worried about or trying to suppress or avoid. Does that make sense? Is that I know? Yeah, I
Absolutely.
know you don't know, but do you think that potentially is kind of what it boils down to?
I mean, I certainly think so. That makes sense. I think it makes sense that when I felt again as safe and as loved, and that I'm enough right now, as I did and do with these medicines, that it's these alt things from the exterior have less value.
Hmm.
The scarcity mindset, the need to generate as many resources, and the fear that I'm not going to be okay at some point in the future becomes significantly less.
Hmm.
And so then maybe the need to escape becomes less.
Like I said, I've had a very good conversation with Mikey about this, and listened to doing research and listening to you specifically, and obviously then the Netflix documentary. It just seems to me there's such a profound connection with self that comes from this that you don't get any other way really, apart from if you listen to spiritual teachers, they basically say you can get there with extreme meditation practice. But basically, I think it was I can't remember who the main guy was, but basically said that it was basically like psychedelics are cheating. You basically you
Ah,
go to that this spiritual enlightenment without actually doing the work, which I thought was quite funny. And again, it seems to me that when it comes to the antidepressants, it numbs people to themselves, where psychedelics is literally doing the opposite and it's reconnecting them with themselves. And I think that's when you look at society in general, whether people are depressed or anxious, whatever it is, I feel like in modern day society, a lot of people just don't know themselves. And as a species, we're completely lost from our roots. And that's what's causing us these issues. We're basically just taught to distract ourselves with television, with porn, with phones, with whatever it is. and not just be with ourselves. But then once you take these psychedelics, there's nowhere else for you to go. And I love this where he said, when you come to something that's uncomfortable, you're asking, what are you here to teach me? I think that's absolutely beautiful way to go into that, not just in psychedelics, but in life in general, when you face the problem. Now, I just want to just move forward from this really nicely on. This conversation's flown really nicely, which is bizarre because we've gone all over the shop, but it's gone really, really nicely. So basically, to fundamentally summarize what we've said, you do the psychedelics, it frees your mind, and then it allows you to do things differently. Can we talk about the differentiation between assisted therapy, which is what we're talking about here, and getting high with your mates?
Hmm.
Because this is, again, something that's a very key differentiation. What we're talking about here, we're not talking about going down to the local field and getting high with all your mates and getting smashed off your tits on alcohol. We're talking about a really safe therapeutic environment. So can we talk about this therapeutic environment and set versus setting?
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to touch on one more thing you said for just a moment, which is about this idea of not understanding ourselves. I
Mm.
think as a society, we are taught at a very early age that what we want to do is not okay. It's not time for play, it's time to learn. You're not supposed to learn like this, you're supposed to learn like that. You're not supposed to learn this thing you're interested in, you're supposed to learn this thing I'm teaching you. And over, we're told what we think and what we feel doesn't matter. Become a good producer, go generate resources, become part of the machine, have your weekends, have a few weeks off a year, and that's what
Be
life is
happy.
about.
Just be happy. Yeah.
And just be happy, be okay with that.
Yeah.
And and then we're constantly moving the goalpost. I will be happy when I'm in a relationship. I get married. I get a house. I get this job. I have a big company. I have this big promotion. I have this much money. I have this much money in the bank. I have when I retire, when I have this. It the goalpost constantly moves because it's external. And every time we achieve an external goal, we just set another one. What I think psychedelics does is it allows us to say, you have enough and you are enough now.
Ooh.
So stop. You don't need the goalpost. And what you're thinking about is okay. And you're feeling love as the currency, and you're sharing love as an energy exchange, going back to your language from earlier. And that's enough. And I know there's people listening like, yeah, it's enough, but how do you feed the table? There's it's that scarcity mindset that is that I think is so it's painful, it's crippling.
Mm-hmm.
There's there are plenty of resources. There are plenty of resources out there for everybody to be fed, for everybody to have to be able to share share their love.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think we're taught that there's just not enough, and we have to protect ours and get more. And if we don't, what's going to happen when? What's going to happen when we get sick? What's going to happen when we get older? What's going to happen when our something happens to our kids? And it's I don't think that's healthy. And I think psychedelics gives you a glimpse of what that can look like
And what it's supposed to be like.
and
At
what
our
it's supposed to
core,
be like.
what we're supposed to be. By the way, I love that. I know, again, completely off tangent. Like you basically gone taking it off a tangent, but that is right there a really powerful 3 or 4 minutes. I want people to go back and listen to that again because, again, you're completely right. I've spoken about it a few times on the podcast, and it's something that I really have to work hard on. I think you may have to as well because even though you're aware of this stuff and you know that there's an abundance out there, and again, it's about being a creator. Like that's what we're here to be. We're here to create. We're here to grow. It's still very, very easy to go back into that scarcity mindset because it's absolutely relentless. Everywhere you look, it's scarcity, 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 scarcity. And even when you're aware of this stuff, sometimes you can get caught just getting caught up into that. So you're completely right there. We're not taught how to think, and I believe that critical thinking is a lost art almost. We just got to think this, okay, and it's just beaten out of us. And as you said there, just that connection of who we're supposed to actually be at our core, which is pure and adulterated love, growing, creating, expressing ourselves, however that may be. And when you come at life from that, it becomes easier to actually earn the money because you're happy regardless whether you get it or not. It's when you put so much pressure on having this thing, that's when issues go. Look at Tyson Fury. I use this example all the time where there's videos of him when he's 16 years old saying he's going to be world heavyweight boxing champion of the world. What happens? He gets this external thing. He then becomes severely depressed and wants to kill himself because he thought his life was going to be made when he had this thing. But that's not what life's about. It's not about the thing. You can have the things, but don't make that your end goal. Like, am I making sense with that?
A total 100% sense. Yes. And Yeah, we're here to learn, heal, and grow, period.
Mm.
When we work, that's an opportunity to us all to learn, heal, and grow together. We can maybe share whatever that work is with outside people. But these external goals of I will be happy when, the other thing, let me just actually do one more thing on this with external goals. One of the things I believe psychedelic medicine teaches you is that you can't fail. It's just not an option. It doesn't exist. It's a false concept or construct. If we're only here to learn, heal, and grow, there are things we cannot achieve. That's an okay word to potentially use. But to fail, no. Whatever happened, you learned something, you grew, and now you're going to do something else. And if we can get back into that mindset of, oh, this business didn't work out, this job didn't work out, this relationship didn't work out, okay. But suffering is the piece that's optional.
Mm.
Um, we can have these experiences that don't go according to script and still move forward without beating ourselves up.
Mm.
And that's a again, these are things I didn't know or didn't think about pre-psychedelic medicine. Um, I was just part of the machine. I was going to be happy when I had 100 employees, and I was going to be happy when I had 500 employees, and I was going to be happy when I had a building with with the company's name on it. No, everything just got more complicated. Not more happy. Going to be happy when I take time to be aware, when I connect with other people. Let's go down one more rabbit hole, Daniel.
Listen,
We as men,
Matt, honestly, this is one of the situations where it annoys me that I'm live on a podcast because I just want to pause and reflect on what you've just said.
let's
And
pause.
I've had to be like, no, we're in a podcast. Like, keep going, keep going. What you've just said there is really profound, and I love that. So, sorry, carry on. Say about men. Like, I'm loving this. You are
I'm
dropping
going to
bombs.
do one more. For men, I know, or for me, I was taught that the only time that I'm really allowed to be intimate is during sex. The rest of my life, I'm supposed to be going and doing something and providing something. And and I've learned that I love being intimate. I like being intimate with a lot of people, and it doesn't need to be with sex. And I didn't realize how hungry I was for that level of connection that that was there the whole time if I just reached out and asked for it and extended.
Can you give some examples
Um,
of that? Because that's a really powerful thing you've just said there. Can you give me some examples of how people can do that and what you sort of mean by that? Because I don't think people fully understand what you're saying there.
I mean, I think right now, you and I have met for all of 49 minutes, and we're having a pretty deep conversation, and we're talking about a lot of things. And I'd love to spin this back on you here in a moment and find out what's resonating and why. Um, but these types of conversations are deeper than what happened last night, who won between Duke and UNC, what did you watch on TV. This is I'm a human and I'm sharing things that happen to me and things that I'm thinking about, and you're a human and you're sharing things, and that's beautiful, and it's a and it feels good.
Mm.
And if I can, I like it when people are like, you're a beautiful man, and I love you. And I like saying that to other people. You are a beautiful human. I love you. And I don't need anything. I don't want anything. I'm just sharing and giving love.
Mm.
And I didn't know I could do that outside of a bedroom.
Mm.
It's yeah, it's really lovely. And I find that in this work and in this experience that this is an everyday thing. These are everyday connections that feel really, really good that I didn't know I could have.
I love what you said there about the podcast because Mikey sometimes says, and when Kay's watching as well, that I have really good rapport with the guests. Like I've never spoke to you. We've had one email exchange, and then we're coming in here, and I feel connected with you. And I had a previous guest, and we had this conversation with as well. And I feel, from what we spoke about here, is that we're both coming into this completely pure and just trying to add value. There's no ego. It's just a case of you're here trying to give some value. I'm here trying to get some value for my audience. And it's just, we're just being like, we're not trying to prove anything to anyone else. We are just being in the moment. I'm listening to you, you're listening to me. And it just builds this connection where I'm just sat here and like I said, 54 minutes gone, 55 minutes gone. I'm just like, I really like this guy. I know nothing about you apart from what I've researched. I'm like, this is just a very genuine, lovely guy and that's just the energy transfer through a screen. So imagine what that's actually like in person. It's just a really bizarre concept.
Daniel, I'm just going to reframe what you said one little bit. I love thank you, period. Let me just hang on. Thank you. And I think what makes you good at what you do is that you don't come into this trying to add value for your audience. You come into this because you have a curiosity, and you come into this because and you make a connection, and you know that if you have a curiosity and you make a connection and that's genuine, then that should resonate with your audience. So
You're
I
correct.
think you're coming at this. Yeah, I think it all works because of how you come at this.
You're correct. And you were going to ask me there, what have I learned from this episode? It's my whole pursuit with this is that I'm just trying to be the best version of myself. That's fundamentally what I'm trying to do. I've spent 28 years of my life just existing in a pit of misery, essentially, without realizing that I was there. So when I have guests like yourself on and you're presenting new ways of actually expanding your consciousness and actually reconnecting with yourself, it fascinates me. So everything that you're saying here, I'm just linking it back to my meditation, for example, because I can't relate. I've never done a psychedelic. So when you're saying these things and describing it to me, the only thing I have to relate to that is when I feel like I'm having an out of body experience when I'm meditating.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just like, oh, this could potentially add to this. And that's where I'm coming at from a complete place of this is fascinating because I didn't know this stuff was really available, if that makes sense. I was the dare generation where, like I said, you got people taking psychedelics and jumping off a building. That was my whole thing with it. And until I never spoke to Mikey, I'd never met anyone that openly told me they'd done psychedelics. It just wasn't a thing for me, and that's why I find this conversation so fascinating. So it is. You're completely right. Every time I have a guest on, it's from me just being curious, and as you said, because it's from a place of genuine authenticity, it's going to naturally pass on to my audience. So again, thank you very much for saying that. That's you're completely right. Can we? Because again, I'm very cautious of your time as well. Can we? I could talk to you about this all day. Like I said, you're absolutely brilliant. Can we just link it back to this assisted therapy versus getting high with your
Versus
friends?
recreational.
Yes, and like the set versus setting.
Yeah, so it is and I want to be careful here because there are people who come to this medicine from a recreational perspective, and I don't want to judge them. No bad them. Um, but I but I do believe I can offer this. When we talk about three S's, when you approach this medicine and you pay attention to the set, the setting, and the source, the probability of having a meaningful experience um, is significantly higher. So the working backwards, source is, where's your medicine come from? Do you know it's pure? So a lot of people in a recreational sense, they don't know who they bought from. They don't know if it's laced with anything. They don't know really what they're taking. There's lots of websites out there that you can see. I think drugs.com is one. What things are sold as. Oh, I thought I was buying MDMA and I was really buying ketamine and fentanyl and this and mixed up. So sources, yeah, that can be challenging. It's unfortunate that in our countries we don't have a reasonable drug policy. There isn't an open market, and people are forced underground to buy these psychedelic medicines, with the exception of ketamine. Um, yeah, and that leads to teenagers or kid leads to kids dying, it leads to people dying, and it leads to I think more substance use disorders than are needed.
Can we just pause there for 2 seconds because
Of course.
there's a graph that I've seen and it talks about fatalities when it comes to taking things like alcohol versus psychedelics. And am I correct in it? Is it fatalities where basically alcohol's on one side super high and psychedelics is right down the bottom, and I think you're more likely to get injured horse riding or something. Is that correct?
Yeah, I
Am I
think
saying that
Imperial
right?
College, and then a number of there's a number of studies, a couple of them out of England, where they took a lot of a lot of drugs, and said, what is the harm of this drug to
That's the one.
yourself and to others? And on the far left is things like alcohol and tobacco, great harm to yourself, great harm to others. Heroin's on that side. On the far right are things like psilocybin, LSD, even MDMA is on that side. There is no lethal dose of LSD and psilocybin. You can overdose on aspirin. People overdose all the time in alcohol. Um, people, a huge percentage of people who try cigarettes or tobacco get hooked. A huge percentage die. So the how things are scheduled has nothing to do with science or what makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
It's politics.
Mm-hmm.
So so yeah, so that's
I just
yes,
want to go
you
because
are
you talk
much
about that then.
safer.
Yeah, I just want to talk about like the safety of it. And I just wanted to clear that up because people still think that these drugs aren't safe. And as you said, it's purely because they're not getting proper authentic stuff. It's like I said, it's I think there was a research paper in America where they said that LSD, maybe got it wrong, LSD was really bad and it basically destroyed people's brains. But it wasn't LSD. They were actually giving them methamphetamine or something. They got it mixed up. So it's like there's this massive fear mongering unnecessarily. Then you look at things like alcohol, which again are conscious altering. Again, when you're drunk, you're not consciously in control of what you're doing. But again, that's glorified. And if you're not going out getting drunk at the weekend, you're a loser. Yeah, actually, if you're taking some magic mushroom in a controlled environment, you're a drug head. And do you know what I mean? Like you're a loser and all this sort of stuff. And it's like you said, I just want to just clarify that if what people think it is versus what it is completely different. So yeah, really important about where you're actually getting stuff from. And then what about the set versus setting as well?
So set refers to your mindset. So that can mean a couple things. One is, are you working with someone who has really advised you on what is this medicine going to do? You've taken X, it's going to last this long. These are the types of things you might experience during this journey. These are kind of best practices for how to get into the medicine. These are practices for if something challenging occurs. Um, they help you. What is your intention? Have you really thought through why are you doing, why are you choosing this medicine now? And trying to get clarity on that. All of that is the mindset. And again, um, when you take recreational psychedelics and you don't know, you're not, everything's unclear, it can lead to an unclear experience. And then that gets to setting, which ties right in. Setting is what is the physical environment that you are taking this? So again, best practice when Johns Hopkins and Imperial College talk about like what is the leads to the best outcomes. You know you're surrounded by people who love you, people who are going to care for you. You are free of distractions. You're not going to be disturbed. In a recreational setting, those things typically are not there. Not always, but typically not. Um, and these medicines can really shift the way we think about sound and smell and color. So when we don't have control of our environment, these normally benign external forces can be really jarring.
Mm.
So that's where like a lot of the medicine that experience I've had, you wear eye masks with the eyes cut out, so you can keep your eyes open, but you're in pitch black, and and in my experience, I've never seen cathedrals as high, sunsets as beautiful as in this black mask. And then that's also why in a lot of experiences in clinical studies, they have playlists for you. So they're going to have some type of music, typically without lyrics, not always, that helps you guide you gently on your journey. Um, but it's the well thought out typically,
Mm.
and in an external recreational environment, you're many times at the whim of somebody else's decision, and listening to some thrash metal in the middle of your psilocybin journey might not be the right music choice for that moment.
So my understanding of that then is you've got your senses. So when you're doing it through a therapeutic setting, it's to try and, as best as possible, control the senses and allow your higher mental faculties to come through. For example, like your thoughts, your thinking, your visualization, all of these things that like high mental faculties that we've got, that everyone's got, that we don't know we've got, they start to express themselves because you're not actually consciously able to use your senses. Is that kind of the thing? You're letting your inner subconscious world like express itself.
Yeah, absolutely. You have you're allowing your inner healing to occur. You're
Mm.
allowing the medicine to do what it's there, and you're staying in a position where you can be aware of what's happening. And then the wild part about psychedelic medicine, unlike alcohol, is you can remember everything the next day,
Mm.
or a lot of it the next day. Not everything, but a lot. Yeah. So all of that, when you have control over set, setting, and source, can make a huge difference in the experience.
Mm. Honestly, I love this. Just to wrap this up, can we just quickly just talk about your book, Psychedelics for Everyone? It's a beginner's guide to the powerful medicines for anxiety, depression, and more. Can you just quickly summarize from audience why you wrote this book and why you wrote it and who, I know it's for beginners, but like who could actually benefit from reading it?
So right after this first experience, again, as a non-drug user, I was like, oh my God, now what? Like, okay, these friends organize this. What do I do now? And I felt like there's like a secret handshake that I didn't know to work on the next path. So part of why I went and got a master's in psychology and neuroscience is let me understand kind of what's literally happening in the brain to the best of our understanding. And then what are the kind of what does the world of psychedelic medicine look like? What's the research? What are the experiences? What are the warnings? What are the things people should know? And then how do I write that in a way that anybody can understand it? And then I went and said, okay, but if I'm going to do this, I really want to get all of this medically reviewed. So I had different experts come in and medically review all the different components so that it can be a trusted source. So that the idea behind the book is that you can pick this, you can read there's 5 personal stories from me. There's an introduction to kind of psychedelics as a whole. It takes you through the history, the legalities, the religious components, the things to know. And then it dives deep into 8 different medicines. And again, what does the research say? What are things you should know about? What are the warnings? And the idea is not that everybody needs to go take a psychedelic, but I hope that it gets across why psychedelics are good for society. And then that helps people, okay, maybe it's not for me, but it's for someone I love, or it's for somebody I know, or it's going to change the way I vote. And I'm hoping that this book can do that so that it's approachable to people with a non-science background. It's not too technical. It's not too opinionated. It's not too woo-woo.
Honestly, it's I've had an amazing time here, Matt. Genuinely, this has been a fantastic conversation. I'm definitely going to be getting your book. I'm going to get Mikey to put all the links in the show notes so people can actually go out and buy that from yourself. If people want to connect with you more, do you have a website? Do you have an Instagram? What's the best way for people to get hold of you?
Yeah. So mattzemon.com is my website, so they can find out about the book. I have lots of little introductory videos to some things in psychedelics on there. The book is available anywhere books are sold. There's an audiobook now, which is fun. I have the Dr. Carlos Warder, who has been working with, he's an MD, PhD. I think he's written 22 books, speaks 8 languages. He wrote the forward and reads it in the audiobook. And then I read all the pieces I wrote. And then a woman named Leslie Howard wrote all the pieces that women wrote in the book. And then I'm active on LinkedIn and on Instagram. And again, I'm here to help. So anyone who has any questions can absolutely reach out, and I do my best to respond in a reasonable amount of time. But I'm here to help. So don't be shy.
No, Matt, honestly, hopefully this isn't the last time I speak to you. I'd love to stay connected.
I feel the same way.
Thank you very much for sharing your knowledge and giving us your time today.
Thank you, Daniel. I appreciate you having me on and tackling this topic, or introducing your audience to this topic.
Thank you very much.